All right, let's dive into the chapter. Okay. So, 'cause this is it's actually really good. And you know what this one has, Jimmy? A little bit of action. Okay.
Yeah,
So
it does.
this is John 5. John is with the Magnar's men nearing a village alongside a lake. He realizes that he must somehow escape and reach Castle Black before the raiders do, in order to warn them. The Thens captured an old man camped in one of the ruined houses, and Stir commands John to kill the man. John balks, but Ygritte slits the man's throat with her dagger. As Stur begins to command his men in the old tongue, a crash of thunder sounds, and suddenly a dire wolf is attacking the Thens. John mistakes the wolf for Ghost or Greywind for a moment, wondering if Robb has returned to the north, but he realizes that it is summer. The dire wolf slaughters several wildlings, and in the confusion, John mounts the old man's horse and begins to flee. He is hit with an arrow in the calf, believing the shot was fired by Ygritte. John gets away, forcing the horse to gallop for hours without rest, heading for Castle Black. I think, this is, the show does also a very good job with this chapter, with this scene. The chapter itself is there's a little wave where the chapters themselves are actually a little on the shorter side. But there's a lot to take away. And we talked a little bit about this last week, right? Because there is some kind of Bran carryover into this. And in fact, you actually can make an argument that Bran is in this chapter, right? Since Summer is in there, and we saw Bran work into Summer, the last thing. So there's another little moment. And hey, maybe that's a future Bran, right? Influencing present Bran, influencing this thing to do with Jon Snow. And remember, all the way back, I think I really said on Patreon, was that super analytical breakdown of the John chapters, where you see how many times people appear and are mentioned and everything. And Bran is actually the highest, well, behind Sam, but Sam only has 10 chapters, right? So, but Bran, John appears in almost every, not every chapter, but a ton of Bran chapters, considering how many Bran has. And here's another instance in which Bran is actually in a John chapter.
Yeah, and it kind of frames this entire thing and how they're thinking about where they are and what they're going to do. I mean, obviously, Bran is trying to go back. Well, I shouldn't say back, but to the north. John's trying to go back to the wall, which for him is south, which is kind of interesting. They're literally intersecting at this point. But the highlight of this chapter, without a doubt, is like Ygritte and John's relationship and the worldviews of which they carry about independence and then society and the cost of these things. And I actually think that Ygritte is a little bit underrated as a character sometimes. A lot of people just memes that Nut and Jon Snow, but there's so much more to be had about the relationship and what the impact it'll have on Jon later on as he starts becoming a leader. And then who knows, maybe the King of Winterfell, maybe, if George were to change his ending points, possibly he could be the king of it all at the end. I don't think that's going to happen, but regardless, him working within the structure of Westeros, power hierarchy. He will have big decisions. He will put people in important places, definitely in this story. And Ygritte's conversation was all about, you think that you guys are so free because you have these big castles and you can spend your money and stuff. But at the end of the day, like, you have paid for it by having to kneel and having to conform to everything that quote unquote society is forcing you to do. Whereas Ygritte is much more in the libertarian camp, I think, of political philosophy. So Ygritte definitely has some good points about the society that is Westeros. And I think John also has some pretty good points about the advancements, and they're going, through this land and they're kind of talking about the history of it and who gave what to where. And I don't know, it's actually a lot deeper than people would probably give it credit for, thinking about Ygritte just telling Jon Snow he knows nothing, and that this wildling girl with jagged teeth, is actually kind of spitting some truth, at least here, and making Jon see things from a non black and white perspective, which he happens to do all the time. This is part of his coming of age, is that he's learning other things, and even against his own wishes that he would not be in love with Ygritte and that he would not want her, he does. And he says, she smiles him with her crooked teeth and he just melts, essentially. So tragic ending for their relationship in many ways. Did the arrow that was fired that hit him in the calf, was it from Ygritte? Maybe.
Yeah,
maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. We'll never know.
Yeah, and the show, I'm pretty sure she just shoots him.
Yeah, Yeah.
It's
Well,
it's
that's
it's it's
that's the
the
thing
it's
in the show.
it's
You kind
definitely
of have to make a more
show, right?
definitive thing, right?
And they
So the
did,
book
yeah.
gets to play with it a little bit more.
It is the cool little it is obviously, it's not like it's something that actually happens in the story, but the simple fact that the actors,
Yeah.
got married is great. You
Yeah. Yeah.
in real life, John and Ygritte do get together. They do make it work. It's kind of a cool little,
It's like the Americans. Those two actors actually, Kerry Russell and what's his name, got married after being married on the show,
Oh, cool.
which is perfect because their chemistry was insane on
Yeah.
screen. That doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
Phenomenal, great show, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, a cool little thing I want to talk about it here, and this is just something I kind of got me thinking. So yeah, like you just dove in a lot to what the John and Ygritte part of the story.
Hmm.
So the opening thing, like you said, they're talking a little bit more about Brandon's gift, right? They're talking about, like, she's asking about what happened to the people who lived in that, how they build that, right?
Hmm.
She says, who built all of that, all of the stone like that? Ygritte asked him. Some king? No, just the men who used to live here. What happened to them? They died or went away. Brandon's gift had been farmed for thousands of years, but as the watch dwindled, there were fewer hands to plow the fields, tend the bees, and plant the orchids, so the wild had reclaimed many a field and hall. In the new gift, there had been villages and holdfasts whose taxes, rendered in goods and labor, helped feed and clothe the Black Brothers, but those were largely gone as well. Um, so I just like that this chapter starts with the idea of Brandon's gift, right?
Oh yeah.
And then in theory, it kind of ends in a gift from Bran, because
Mm.
Bran is in Summer, who is able to attack, then so that John can escape. And in a way, it's kind of like Bran's gift.
I love this. And you and I were talking last week about how many prophetic things were happening in that chapter that maybe we won't know until, more books come out. Speaking of your grace from Jojen or whatever. But we also talked about the possibility that there is a Bran that for each generation that is influenced by past Bran and is special and a reiteration, possibly, or influenced by the three-eyed, aka, Bran. This kind of fits that, doesn't it? Just a little
Mhm.
bit. I love that, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a little about that. And then one other line that kind of stuck out to me, and I think it's really kind of George playing with, doing some wordplay here. So at the end of the chapter, when he is trying to escape, right? So John is thinking about his leg, and he's, being injured. He's thinking about who shot him, right? Was the fletching gray or white? Ygritte fletched her arrows with pale green goose feathers. Did she lose a shaft at me as I fled? John could not blame her for that. He wondered if she'd been aiming for him or the horse. If the mare had gone down, he would have been doomed. A lucky thing my leg got in the way, he muttered. He rested for a while to let the horse graze. She did not wander far. That was good. Hobbled with a bad leg, he could never have caught her. It was all he could do to force himself back onto his feet and climb onto her back. How did I ever mount her before, without saddles or stirrups or a sword in one hand? That was another question he could not answer. Thunder rumbled softly in the distance, but above him the clouds were breaking up. John searched the sky until he found the ice dragon, then turned the mare north for the wall and Castle Black. The throb of pain in his thigh muscle made him wince as he put his heels into the old man's horse. I am going home, he told himself, but if that was true, why did he feel so hollow? He rode until dawn while the stars stared down like eyes. So
Mm.
I want to do a lot of like George word breaking down there. So I kind of think, because of the way George writes, the how did I ever mount her before? And when he's talking about the horse, I think it's now John is actually kind of making a shift, and he's sort of thinking about, oh, I'm returning to the wall. And because George likes to use the word mounting when he's describing people, doing the deed,
Mhm.
I kind of think that's really what is like, it's like a double, wordplay there with George, and that it's like now John also has to think about, how did I do that? Because now his life is going back to being a brother of the Night's Watch. Because earlier in this chapter, he does kind of think also, he's like, man, if I could just get Ygritte to Winterfell, and he's thinking about a life about her with Winterfell. And now, even though he's talking about the horse, I think he's also kind of thinking about Ygritte there.
Yeah. I like that little double meaning, possibly.
Yeah.
I dig it. I dig it. And we do know that George's diction or word choice does matter. It's just something. This is one of the reasons why it takes him so long to write, because I think he's extremely careful with the words that he chooses, which all great authors do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's another little wordplay here. I think this is just sort of like an ultra inside thing for George,
Okay.
but he's talking about the thunder in the distance,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then he's talking about like the old man's horse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in I believe it would be the first two Dunk and Egg books. The horse that Dunk has is named Thunder, and he did get it from Sir Orlando Pennytree, and it is. And he also describes it as like the old, man's horse because it was his. And remember,
Oh
Thunder ends
my
up
God.
dying at the beginning of thing at the bear. So I think if just like that wordplay there is kind of it doesn't mean anything in terms of big theories or
No,
anything
no,
at
no.
all, but
But
it is just kind of something that kind of sticks out to me a little bit.
it also builds like some sort of like internal consistency within the series of
Right.
like that certain word choice reminding you of the imagery from Duncan Egg. Doesn't mean it's connected necessarily, but
Right.
what it does make you remember is a fictional history in a fictional world that all of a sudden now feels real because you're thinking of it as you're reading, right? Like it's in your memory bank. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Also, one other thing here, there's a lot, is when John has to figure out where to go, he stares up in the sky until he finds the ice dragon, and then that is what leads him home to the
Mm-hmm.
wall. John is both of ice and fire, right? So it is like kind of, oh, here it's an ice dragon. That is the thing. Because I think oftentimes we think a lot about characters' internal monologues, right? Like Danny saying, I'm blood of the dragon, Arya remembering who she is. I am Arya Stark of Winterfell, and all of the different identities she takes on, and as well as Bran. We talked about this a little bit last time too. He's Bran Stark of Winterfell. Here you have John, and not that he has a lot of that inner monologue. He does with when he thinks about like kill the boy, with what
Yeah.
Aemon Targaryen tells him. But just kind of another little interesting little thing there that John stares at an ice dragon, considering he's of both ice and fire, and that is what leads him home.
Really awesome. Good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. So
A lot of symbolism there.
yeah. So there's a ton of symbolism, even just in that last, in that last little bit. Tyrion is brought up in this chapter when he's thinking about like the wall and all that stuff, when he's going over some of the backstory of this, right? Talking about this is Queen's crown, right? The Queen stayed here for a night. Old Nana told him the story, but Maester Lewin had confirmed most of it. Alicent, the wife of King Harris the Conciliator. He's called the Old King because he reigned so long. He's sort of explaining this when he came to Winterfell. He brought his queen, 6 dragons, and half the court. She says, I've never seen a dragon. He says, no one has. The last dragons died 100 years ago or more, but this was before that. Queen Alicent, you say. Good Queen Alicent, they called her. One of her castles on the wall was named for her as well, Queensgate. For her visit, they called it Snowgate. If she was so good, she should have torn that wall down. No, he thought, the wall protects the realm from the others, and from you and your kind as well, Sweetling. I had another friend who dreamed of dragons, a dwarf, he told me. And then Jon Snow, one of the Thenns, calls out to him. So just a cool little bit there as well.
Tyrion's dragon dreams have long been pieces of speculation, and it's little things like this. Also, when someone thinks of something kind of like off the wall or random like that, and then it's quickly interrupted with, "Oh, hey, we're supposed to take note." Oh, what was that? What was that about Tyrion's dragon dreams? Right?
Yes, and talking about how we never see a dragon, and then John also has the ice dragon thing as well, and then also the next chapter, because I love the connections to the chapters. There's something in every chapter that kind of pieces directly into the next one. Is a Daenerys chapter, so there obviously are dragons in there and in there as well.
So good, I love it. Each chapter prior frames, and by the way, this is like one of the reasons why I think that Feast and Dance feel a good amount different than the first 3, is because it was split geographically. So I think a lot of that framing got unfortunately lost, right? Because he wrote them all at once and then had to split the books up. And I think that some of that beautiful framing that we have is probably not as consistent or as intentional as it once was. in the first 3 books, upon also being a new beginning in many ways after the Red Wedding.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, I want to pull up just some summaries online and stuff I found, like that people talking about this, and I always like to use that Song of Ice and Fire subreddit, the reread one, especially because it's all from stuff way before the show.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the highest rated one, saying there were a ton of great bits in this chapter. The whole thing is framed by the previous Bran chapter, so that not only is the mystery solved, we get the same scene from 2 different sides, which I've talked about as we begin
Oh
last
yeah,
week, and something
I just
else.
pulled this up. This person's basically agreeing with me about the microcosm of 2 political
Political
beliefs.
debate. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Huh.
They're saying Ygritte thinks everyone would be best if they looked out for themselves. John's argument is that no, if people can focus their energy on farming or building and not only worry about raiders,
The
there's much
Raiders,
more
yeah.
that can be accomplished, and the castles as they pass along the way are proof of this. But the kingdoms have huge castles and fine art and strong swords and maesters' knowledge, and personal problems are not solved. There is an injustice south of the wall. There is more injustice south of the wall than north of it.
Hmm.
Which we talked about. John thinks he is getting society for free, but Ygritte points out how he has paid for it with his freedom. And she says that she's like, yes, but you must kneel. And you said that earlier too, right? Is that, yeah, you can have all of these things, but you do it by bowing to a king or a leader, whereas we have a complete free system. You
I,
must be complacent in the system.
yes, and that is it, right? You surrender a certain amount of freedom to be a part of the system. I read a really amazing book. It's like one of my favorite books of all time. It's called Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, and it's about an English butler post World War II who basically he was serving an English gentleman, and the gentleman actually had to happen to be a Nazi sympathizer, and he had to wrestle with the fact that one, his profession was dying, because being a butler post World War II certainly was not the thing it once was. Is something that was like very prestigious for a long time of being an English butler. But he also had to wrestle with the fact that he had surrendered a certain amount of his moral compass or his ability to make decisions about what was moral to his master. Essentially, like he concedes that the man that he works for represents him. And it's unfortunate that the master that had represented him ended up being a Nazi sympathizer. And how do you wrestle with that while also still loving your craft of being a butler? And in an interview, Ishiguro actually talks about this. And he said that every single person is an English butler. And that's why he wrote the book. And at first you sound like you're like, what? No, this isn't Downton Abbey. What is this? But then you start to think about it. And we certainly do surrender some of our power to the people who are in charge to make what we hope to be moral decisions that represent us either as a people or as a country or a society. And I think that has a lot of relation to what Ygritte and John are debating about, right? Like,
Yeah.
You're certainly giving up some of that power once you decide to conform to society. And so, is the Night's Watch going out and killing like 100 free folk? Is that a decision that every single Westerosi would support or be in support, support? Probably not. But you give up that ability to choose once you decide to conform. So just really fascinating. And by the way, Remains of the Day is considered to be like one of the best books in the last probably 50 years, and it won him a Nobel Prize in Literature. And I would just like to point out that George is actually playing with the exact same themes here, which kind of shows you that there's a lot of literary merit to A Song of Ice and Fire and George's approach to writing fiction.
Yeah, well, George also would have grown up in the
Yep.
1950s and 60s, and I mean, I'm a history major in college. I mean, obviously, if you go back and study that period in American history, the big thing was, oh, we don't want to be communist, right? We have freedom. We have freedom over here, right?
Yeah.
And what actually, if you really kind of look into it, is that a lot of people did a lot of things that were considered, the social norm became, if you went outside of the social norm, which you are allowed to do in this country, ooh, that's weird, or ooh, that's like commie stuff, right?
Yeah,
And
right, yeah.
you're actually kind of
You're narrowing the scope of what
you're
becomes
narrowing the
acceptable
scope
and
of what you
free.
actually could or should do because of fear of McCarthyism, and just, oh well, they're communists. What? Well, why are they saying that? And so if you really kind of study that period in time, a lot of that stuff is kind of similar too. Is that in
Yeah.
order to sort of stand up and defeat communism, you put yourself into a lot of social norms where you actually were saying, well, yes, you are free to do that, but you don't really want to do that.
You don't want to be part of the out group ever.
Exactly.
That doesn't feel good.
Yeah,
Also, George, I think
clean cut haircuts. You don't want to
straight
have long
laced.
hair. Yeah,
Yeah, you don't want to be a hippie. I mean, nobody
yeah,
wants to be a hippie, right? I mean, hippies saved Lord of the Rings, which in turn actually ended up creating A Song of Ice and Fire. So we should thank the
yeah,
hippies. But George also went through a time period of where he watched his entire family get destroyed by the Great Depression. And his family used to own like a dock and a harbor and were like really wealthy.
yeah,
And they lost it all. They had to sell it. And he lived in the projects of the Bronx, and he would walk by that bay every single day, that harbor every single day, and be like, yeah, my family used to own that, and now I'm eating rationed bread. So that is a constant reminder of a system that he felt failed him. So seeing George write about these things obviously is not surprising whenever you have that context of his personal history. But I always like to point out, that this story is operating on a very entertaining level about plot and what happens next and like the chess pieces, but it's also operating at a level where I think you can pull out a lot of literary merit as well. It's a great piece of literature.
yeah. Yeah, let me pull up some other comments here saying, wow, what a great chapter, great writing. I was really feeling the despair of the constant confusion John was in. I'm not sure on the timeline for how long John has been with the Wildlings now. We prefer free folk on this podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
We don't use those derogatory terms. No, that's fine. But he has definitely been on a journey with them, and sometimes it doesn't take long to form friendships, even when you're trying not to. This is a very emotional chapter. I love Summer coming to John's aid. I think in the next Bran chapter, he says something about seeing John ride off through Summer. Could Bran have been controlling Summer during this time? Obviously, we think he was, or do we think he had helped John out? It says, oh wow, I didn't consider Bran's warging. Yeah, nothing important there. But yeah, I guess that'd be something. I have to go look and see what that next Bran chapter is.
Hey, this is a pretty tinfoil comment I'd like to read here.
Sure.
This is wild. So quote the line, he rode till dawn while stars stared down like eyes. And then they go to comment and say, we've seen starlight mentioned before, mostly associated with Dany's dreams. In the last A Dance with Dragons chapter, Quaithe is made of stars. And this is a leap of faith, but it is probably safe to assume that Quaithe is responsible for Dany's dreams and is certainly part of Dany's visions in Drogon and Dany's excellent adventure. It is also safe to assume that Quaithe is using a glass candle in another leap of faith. Are stars associated with the use of a glass candle or maybe any sort of magical scrying? So who's watching John here and why? My guess would be Bloodraven. It's pretty obvious that he spies on the Night's Watch using Mormont's Raven, but it could be Marwyn. After all, he's probably the one who put the idea into Aemon's head that Aemon and Gilly and Mance's baby should go to Old Town. So
Yeah.
I love this tying in the Marwyn the Mage. I do think this is a bit tinfoily to think about a magical.
I mean,
scrying, but
there's another character, by the way, you and I really haven't talked about, but you want to talk about a total wild card.
oh yeah, oh dude, I'm telling you, when we get into A Feast for Crows and Dance of Dragons, there is so much untreaded territory there that people only look for the stuff that connects to the show. Like we talked about the Dorne stuff, but Marwyn the Mage, Old Town, like this is all major stuff that did not matter in the show. Someone also commented talking about Bloodraven and was saying Bloodraven plus Shiera Sea Star equals Melisandre, which I think is absolutely insane. But
right.
But that's a theory we could dive down another day.
Yeah. I'm looking through that Bran chapter just to see if it would be a small, it doesn't look like it's at all like a passage. It might just be like a no, I don't even see it. So yeah. And yeah, although he does, I think, meet Cold Hands next chapter. So that's a big a big game changer. So
yeah.
So
also the Duncan Egg reference and then Cold Hands coming up. I don't know. Maybe we can get a little tinfoily ourselves. One of the quotes that someone shared, I really like this quote from the chapter, says, the gods made the earth for all men to share. Only when the kings come with their crowns and steel swords, they claimed it was theirs. Pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty good. All right. Anything else on this chapter, Jimmy? You want
No, just
to?
a banger. I think a lot of really cool connections, a lot of really cool imagery, and now we're moving into a Daenerys chapter, which is always fun as we speculate what could ever come of the Queen of Dragons. This is also a great book for her. This is really where she becomes the Queen of Dragons. So I'm excited to read another Daenerys chapter next week.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and yeah, I was just trying to see if there's anything else. Yeah, like we said, another short chapter. This next chapter, I think it's a Daenerys chapter, so it's going to be a little bit longer as well. And I think after that, honestly, it seems like that every book kind of has that, where George just hits this little spurn of like small little chapters in the row, and then he gets back to writing massive one until you get to A Dance of Dragons, in which every chapter is like
There's so much world building that's so
insane.
cool, though.
Yeah, A Dance of Dragons may have to some parts of it may have to be like 2-part episodes for us because they're just so huge.
No, we're doing it all. We're doing it all.
They're so huge. Like some of those Tyrion chapters on the audiobook are like 2 hours long. I mean, it's insane.
I can't wait.
Maybe not 2 hours long, but they're long. They're long. Certainly, there are definitely chapters on the audiobook, even sped up, that are over an hour.
But Roy was also dying when he recorded the book, like literally. So he also reads extraordinarily slow and poorly in that book, unfortunately. But yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, next week, the Daenerys chapter. Next week is I know things have begun heating up, but I feel like this is where everything really picks up. Is this fine little block right here? Because the next one is when Dany rides past all the people who call her mother, right?
Yeah, that's I said Mother Dragon, Jim. This is this.
Yeah,
I think I said Queen of Dragons. My bad. I meant to say Mother earlier. Whatever.
Yeah, and then the Arya chapter is the Ghost of High Heart. So we're definitely entering a big, pretty good stretch here. And maybe some people who are listening to us are getting ready to do some traveling and flying. So hopefully we can give some people some good episodes, audiobook episodes to download and listen to. So
yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. So all right, guys. Well, with that, let me pull my my doc up here because
you don't know it by heart.
I do, but sometimes I just forget.
I'm disappointed.
Well, it's more so that I want to see which Daenerys chapter we're in. Okay, it's Daenerys 4 next week. So with that, I want to thank you for playing the Game of Thrones. In our next episode, we will be discussing A Storm of Swords, chapter 42, Daenerys 4.
And if you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe, like us, write a review, leave a comment, or send us a raven at btkcast@gmail.com or bendthekneepodcast.com.
We'll see you next time. And remember that winter is coming.